Hello, I'm Lindsay Terry, and I'd like to introduce to you the ministry of a church usher. Although the major portion of this video session deals with church ushering, I'd also like to share some things about the all-important job of the church service greeters. We'll use all of these very familiar tools and some modern equipment to bring to you vital information about a most important ministry in our churches. One of the greatest needs in our churches today is a well-organized, properly trained corps of ushers. Every usher should know his job and take tremendous pride in it, just as a musician, a Sunday school teacher, or a church staff member. This video session outlines and describes the many facets of the usher's task and properly puts them in perspective. It places each area of duty on a very high pedestal. An usher can be one of the most valuable public relations representatives in your church. No one comes in personal contact with as many of the members and guests of your church. Ultimately, his Christ-like manner and attitude will be a soul-winning aid. This session is not an exhaustive, in-depth study. It is, however, a workable, practical presentation for Sunday-by-Sunday procedure. Prayerfully watch it and take plenty of notes. In this video, we deal with one of the important ministries provided for laymen in the church, the ministry of a church usher. In what better way can we show the importance of such a task than to relate the story of one family and their encounter with church ushers? This story explains in detail why most people decide to return to a church they have visited based on what happens in the first 10 minutes of their visit. A few years ago, Richard and Mary White, along with their son Tim, moved to a southern city from a small town in the Midwest. In that Midwestern town, they had occasionally attended church, but were not members of any church and were not Christians. They were good people, but had never trusted Christ as personal Savior. After being in the new city for about a week, one night they answered a knock at the door and received visitors from the Faith Baptist Church. Upon entering and greeting the Whites, and after proper introductions, the visitor proceeded to inquire as to their church affiliation and relationship. When he found that they were not Christians, he witnessed to them and tried to win them to Christ. He was not successful in this, but did receive from them a promise to attend church the following Sunday. Making good their promise, the Whites showed up to the church on the following Sunday. As they appeared at the door, an alert usher named Jerry Jones immediately noticed that they were visitors. He stepped very briskly to them and extended his hand to Mr. White. "Hello, my name is Jerry Jones. I'm delighted to see you this morning. Is this your first time to visit the Faith Baptist Church?" Well, Mr. White said that it was, and he introduced his family and his son, Tim. "The service is just about to begin," said Mr. Jones. "Let me show you to a seat." Mr. Jones ushered the Whites to a comfortable seat and introduced them to a young couple near them who were members of the church. Presently, the choir marched in and began to sing in a very lively and hearty manner. The Whites were impressed from the very beginning, from the time they were first greeted by a friendly, warm-hearted church usher. And as the service continued, they paid close attention to all that went on around them and to those things that were happening on the platform. Presently, in the seat just in front of them, a baby began to cry out. Immediately, an usher stepped to the end of the pew and said in a very courteous manner, "May I show you to the nursery? We have a beautiful nursery and trained workers to care for your baby." The young mother, embarrassed because of her baby had seemingly disturbed, was relieved because someone was available to help, and she arose and followed the usher. The Whites thought, "My, how attentive the ushers are to the people here, and how helpful that must be." And when the offering was taken, Mr. White remembered that he had inadvertently left his billfold at home and was not prepared to give. He knew that usually when you attend church, you should give when the offering plates pass. He was prematurely embarrassed, but found upon the passing of the plates that this embarrassment was unfounded. The ushers looked straight down the aisle and did not see who gave or did not give. He vowed to himself that next time he would make sure that his wallet was with him. After a stirring sermon by the pastor, the congregation stood and the choir began to sing the invitation. The Whites had been able to come into the service in a very welcome atmosphere. They had been impressed with the friendliness of the ushers and the happiness of the people, and were therefore very attentive during the sermon. As the invitation progressed, they had become more and more pricked in their hearts that they needed Christ as Savior. So, on the second verse of the invitation, they stepped out and walked down the aisle. After being shown the plan of salvation by an alert personal worker at the front of the auditorium, they gave their hearts and lives to Jesus Christ and immediately followed him in baptism. The Whites were very delighted in their newfound faith and in their new church. Mr. White was overheard to say as he left, "I'm glad that I got saved this morning, but I would go back to that church even if I had not been saved, because everyone from the ushers to the people to the pastor made me feel so welcome. I have never seen a church quite like that before." Now, that story is not the happenings of real people in a real circumstance, but it indeed could be. Their story is given at the introduction of this video to show you the real need for confident, friendly, well-trained ushers. To be a church usher is a great honor. One of the most helpful positions in the church is that of an usher, because it's so wide in its scope. The qualifications for this office are high. First of all, a man must be a Christian and a member of the church. And then he must have a deep sense of responsibility for the services of the church. The importance of his task in any service cannot be measured. In fact, it would be absolutely impossible to have a service in a sane, civil manner without proper ushering. Just imagine what a service would be like on any Sunday morning if there were not ushers in their places who were aware of their responsibilities. And now, let's go into part one, and we call this, "What is an Usher?" An usher is a watchman. A good usher will watch over the service like a mother hen over her chickens. Number two, he will anticipate problems as they come up, and he will watch for disturbances and quiet them in the quickest, most diplomatic way possible. He will say to himself, if this service is to be carried out in the right manner, it is up to me to see that the people are well cared for and that they may be able to hear without disturbance or distractions. Number three, he will watch for the comfort of the people at all times. A dad. An usher must be a dad to many boys and girls who come without moms and dads. He must watch over them as he would watch over his own children. He must see that they behave as he would see that his own children behave. A disciplinarian. Number one, an usher must learn how to discipline children and teenagers in a firm yet kind, loving way. Number two, children and young people respond to love. When they recognize that they're being disciplined in love, then there will be no problems. All young people want to be made to do what they know they ought to do in the first place. Many of them are able to do what they want to do at home or at school, but when they come to church, they should be made to behave as they should. Number three, many times it is very difficult to discipline a child, but the need of the service and the need of the child must be considered. A servant. There are many ways an usher can serve the congregation. Many of these ways will be discussed as we continue this video. An usher is chosen. and is in his place for one reason, and that is to serve the people. A host. Just as a man tries to make a guest in his home feel welcome and comfortable, he also must see that the visitors in his church feel welcome and have as comfortable a place as possible. He should make every visitor feel welcome as an honored guest. The church. Number one, when people walk into a church for the first time, the usher that greets them is to them the church. The opinions they are forming are of the church. Number two, the guest will be in a much better attitude and frame of mind to hear the sermon if he has been warmly greeted by an usher. He will have formed a good opinion of the church after his arrival because of the polite gentleman who helped him when he came in. Part two, the head usher. Number one, in order to have a successful group of ushers, you must have a wisely chosen head usher. He must be a man of God dedicated to the church and to his service for Christ. Number two, he must be faithful to the pastor and to the entire program of the church. He must possess definite qualities of leadership that will allow him to meet problems which arise in the church services. He must also be able to deal with matters pertaining to the ushers. Number three, the head usher must be an enterprising gentleman who believes in detailed planning for and training of his staff. Because the pastor works so closely with a person in this position, it is very imperative that he be given the leadership in selecting the head usher. Number four, a pastor will be more careful to select a man who is first of all spiritual and who has the services of the church at heart. There are at least 5 areas in which a head usher has to work and over which he needs to have complete control. This makes his job a little more demanding, but he was chosen for this service. Number 5, he should understand when he assumes the job of head usher that he will have a great responsibility. Now let's talk about training. Number 1, helping to train his staff is one of the most important tasks of the head usher. Number 2, each new man who is enlisted should not be expected to have learned to do this job well, observing from the pew while attending the services. He should be given specific instructions. This not only helps him to do a better job, but also helps him to see that it is an important task and should be done well. Number 3, the head usher should supply each new usher with a written set of guidelines. These can be studied at home and later reviewed by the head usher and the new enlistee. The new man should have some practical instructions in a private session with the head usher. Morale building. Number 1, the head usher must be a morale builder. Number 2, he should help to instill in his staff a deep sense of responsibility at the task for which God has chosen to use them. In occasionally meeting with the ushers, the head usher can give words of commendation, inspiration, and devotion that will help to knit his group together and cause them to do a better job. Checking equipment. Number 1, all materials and equipment needed for the service should be checked prior to the services by the head usher. If there is usually a crowded condition, he should see that there are enough extra chairs for latecomers or for the overflow crowd. Number 2, the head usher is responsible for seeing that all is in readiness. It would be a good idea for the head usher to check with the pastor before each service to see if there are any particular or unusual matters to be taken care of in the service. He should see that all church bulletins, visitors cards, and other materials are in place, and that there is a sufficient supply. Number 3, The head usher should be in the auditorium early enough to see that the heat and the ventilation are properly adjusted. A great deal of discomfort and many disturbances can be prevented with a simple check of the temperature of the room. He must make sure that all the reserved sections are properly roped off and that an usher is in charge of each section. Number 4, if the ushers wear any sign of identification, the head usher should see that they're in sufficient supply and that each usher is equipped with his particular identification badge. He must make sure that there are enough ushers to care for the crowd. Special services. Many times during special services, such as revivals, Bible conferences, etc., it is evident that no one has thought about ushers for these special meetings. It is the job of the head usher to check with the pastor when he is aware of any special meetings to see that the ushering is properly cared for. Screening messages. Number 1, all messages to the platform after the service has begun should be carried by the head usher. Number 2, all other ushers should be instructed to channel these messages through him.